Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Good evening, everybody. I am Paul Cadigan, Chairman of the Kennebunkport Zoning Board of Appeals. And this is a virtual Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. We are using the Zoom conferencing format. The agenda on the town's website is the information needed for the public to participate by Zoom conferencing format or by telephone. If you wish to participate through Zoom, you can join Zoom meeting. And the ID number for that is 994-4277-5191. You can also dial in by phone on the East Coast at 929-205-6099, or in the rest of the United States at 301-715-8592. You will be asked to enter the meeting ID number. Again, that's 944-4277-5191, followed by the pound sign. If you are conferencing in by phone or through Zoom and watching this on cable or YouTube, you must turn down your volume or we'll be getting feedback. As always, you can watch us on television on channel 1301 or stream us on YouTube at Kennebunkport Television. During the meeting, only Zoning Board of Appeals members and the current participant as selected by the board will be on screen with audio connected. All other participants will be blacked out and audio muted except when the board solicits their input or public input. I ask that the public take turns when talking, and I'll select members of the public one at a time. Allow others the opportunity to talk once you have made your point, and identify yourself when you begin to talk, please. We appreciate your support and patience as we use this virtual platform for our public meeting process to carry on necessary town business. So I'm first going to take roll call. Looking over the list of those that are attendees. I think I can't see the complete list, but I think the first member of our board, Gordon Ayer, may be an attendee, but he's not going to participate this evening. Paul Cadigan is next. That's me. I'm the chair. I'm here. Wayne Fessenden.
Here.
Karen Schlegel.
Here.
James Fitzgerald. Jim is not here at this time. April Defoe.
Here.
And Kevin McDonald.
Here.
So we have 5 members presently here, and that is a quorum. So we do have a set of meeting minutes from a prior meeting to review, but we're going to table that given that this may be a somewhat lengthy meeting, and we'll pick those up next time around. So at this time, I'm going to ask Dave to explain to the audience the process, please.
You simply need to raise your blue hand. You simply click down, usually at the bar at the bottom of the screen, and I'm not sure exactly what it says, but
Raise hand.
there's a button there, and underneath it there's an option to raise hands. So if you want to make yourself known to say something at the appropriate time, raise your hand and we will allow you to speak.
Thanks, Dave. Dave, I have one question. I've got the participants listed on the right side of my screen, but they don't all fit, and there seems to be a scroll bar on the right-hand side of that I can't get to move, so I'm not seeing everybody. You got a tip for me before I proceed on that?
No, you should be able to drag that scroll bar on the right-hand side of the list and go up and down the list.
I am trying to do that, but it's not cooperating. So, oh, there we go.
Click on a name and then use the down arrow.
If you click once on a name, if you hover your mouse over the list someplace and use up or down arrow.
There we go. All right, that's going to be a little tricky to manipulate through, but let's proceed. So the process for engaging the applicant and interested parties is going to be as follows, everybody. After I've introduced the agenda item, I will request that the applicant and or its representative to raise their virtual hand. I will acknowledge them, and I will ask Dave to promote them to panelists so that they will be visible to the board. And once they have been promoted to panelists, I will direct them to proceed. After the applicant has presented their case, I will call upon each board member individually to give them the opportunity to ask any questions they may have of the applicant. And once the applicant and the board have completed this process, I will direct Dave to place the applicant back into the audience. I will repeat the process for abutters. Now, by abutters, there's a list of abutters that's with the application, and I'll state who those are when we get to that part of the program tonight. I will ask them to raise their virtual hands and ask for Dave to promote them to panelists and allow them to make their presentation. I will call upon each board member to individually give them the opportunity to ask any questions they may have of any abutter. And once the process is completed and the board is satisfied, then I will direct David to place the abutter or abutters back into the audience. I will then repeat the process for the general public. I will ask them to raise their virtual hands and ask for David to promote them to panelists and allow them to present their information. I will call upon board members individually to give them an opportunity to ask questions of each member of the general public that's so appearing. And then once that is completed and the board is satisfied, then I will direct David to place the last of those public members into the audience. Similarly, at that time, I will ask the CEO to be promoted to panelist if the CEO wishes to address the board at that time. And if he does, or if the board has questions, we'll ask our questions of the CEO at that time. And when that process is completed, we'll have the CEO go back into the audience. After that, and this is very conditional, but if we have an adequate amount of time remaining, then we will allow the applicant time for a brief rebuttal, but I can't promise that at this point in time. Once all the input has been given to the board, I'll close the public portion of the hearing on this variance request and invite the board to deliberate. I will call upon each board member individually for this. And should any board member need additional clarification of from any of the interested parties, I'll ask David to promote that party so that that board member can get that clarification. And once that's completed, that interested party will be placed back into the audience. So as we go about this application, it's for a variance, and a variance has 4 components to it. So for each one of those components, the board will do a deliberation. And once that deliberation is completed, then I'll ask for a motion. And I'll try to repeat who has made the motion, and then I'll ask for a second and try to repeat who has seconded the motion. And then I'll call each board member to vote individually on that particular plank or prong of the 4-part variance test. So we'll go through that process 4 separate and distinct times. So that's how we're going to begin this meeting. And before I guess I'm going to introduce the agenda item, and then I'm going to make some comments before we get into gear. So the agenda item reads as follows. Number 1, JJWZ LLC, Sandra Gray, Esquire, authorized agent. Variance request seeking reduction of setbacks, decreasing from 20 feet to 14 feet on the westerly side of the landing platform, and decreasing from 20 feet to 16 feet on the easterly side of said platform. 48 Langsford Road, rear, Assessor's Tax Map 29, Block 1, Lot 11 in the Cape Porpoise West Zone. Now some comments I want to make before we get the meeting going. First, I think it's important for everybody out there to know that this is the very first time that any aspect of this particular project or matter has been brought before this board. This board has not done any prior approval of the plans for it. It's been through planning board, it's been through DEP. They were subject to a building permit from the code enforcement office and other matters from the code enforcement office. But this is the very first time this has been put before the zoning board of appeals. Second, and perhaps most importantly, the scope of this hearing is really rather narrow, and it is limited very specifically to the applicant's request for a variance. So the applicant's request for a variance is articulated in their application materials. And in answer to the question in number 8 of the application, that says the applicant, well, it's not quite a question, but it says the applicant seeks a variance from the following dimensional standards. So what has been put in by the applicant after that is the focus of this meeting, the sole focus of this meeting. And it is as follows. The ordinance requires a 20-foot setback from the right-of-way. The variance requested is for a 14-foot setback on the westerly side of the landing platform, therefore a 6-foot setback reduction, graduating to a 16-foot setback on the easterly side of the landing platform, and therefore a 4-foot setback reduction. That is the scope of the hearing that we're conducting today. So while there might be a lot of other interest in the public in other aspects of this particular project, that is the sole and exclusive focus of this hearing. And I'm going to ask that everybody please restrict your presentation, your comments, to relevant material relevant to that very specific variance request, because everything else is essentially not relevant. Number 3, this board has received and reviewed hundreds, I think literally and hundreds of pages of submissions from the applicant, from the abutters, and from the general public. Now, all of those materials have been received and reviewed by all the board members. We've read it all. And as well, all of those materials have been published on the town's website. So first, I'm going to note that all of those materials are being made a part of our record this evening. So there's no need for those folks that submitted all those materials to get up and to repeat those materials. And I'm speaking more specifically about the many, many informative letters that we received from the general public and from the abutters. We've already got that information, we've reviewed that information, and we've incorporated that information. So thank you for your submissions and your interest, but we don't need to have it read in again. And then finally, the board is aware that for whatever reason, this is a somewhat contentious matter. And it's going to be very important to the board and to the chairman that all parties at all times conduct themselves in a respectful fashion when they're addressing either the board or other parties. So with that, I'm going to bring up the first participant, and I'd like if you would, Dave, bring up Sandra Gray. So she's not on my list, but that's because I can't see the whole of the list. So if you could bring her up to make her a panelist, please.
So right-click and promote to panelist.
She has been promoted.
Hi, Sandra. You need your microphone's off, Sandra. There you go. So at this time, Sandra, we're going to ask you to go ahead and proceed with the presentation you'd like to make.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the presentation that you just gave and the explanation that you gave about the process. So my name is Sandra Gray. I'm an attorney at Woodman Edmonds in Biddeford, and I'm here tonight representing JJWZ LLC. Also present tonight is attorney Jane Libby. He's here also representing JJWZ, and also Bob and Linda Zook. And it's difficult to know for me, because I don't have a list of participants, which members of the public are here. I did just want to briefly note, and I'm not going to go over the letters by any means that were read, but the 24 letters written in support of the variance application came from year-round residents, multi-generational commercial fishermen, harbor masters, users of the fish pier, a former fish pier manager, a former member of the town's growth planning committee, and many others. They all speak to the need and importance of an accessible fish house to alleviate congestion on the pier, to maintain the town's desire for continuing working waterfront in Cape Porpoise, and to maintain the historical relevance of the iconic fish houses that used to permeate the area. Also, I agree with the chair that this application has generated some interest. And while I am going to stick to my application and the variance questions as much as possible, I do need to briefly respond to some of the allegations raised by Attorney Bannon in his letter in order just to get them into the record and to avoid any possible assertions that I may have conceded to any of those arguments. So getting right into the criteria, the first one is that the land in question cannot yield a reasonable return unless the variance is granted. In 2008, the town permitted the reconstruction of the commercial fish house structure that was historically located at 48 Langsford Road in the rear, as indicated by the chair. Due to its non-conforming nature under current zoning, the fish house was reconstructed in the same location as the structure that it was replaced, which was constructed originally in the early 1900s. The purpose of the commercial fish house is for building, repairing, storing fishing gear and supplies, and as many of those materials are large and heavy and cumbersome, there needs to be a gangway to just transport the items from the right-of-way up, and then a safe landing in which to lay them prior to moving them inside the structure. As seen in Attorney Bannon's 921 letter at Exhibit C, and I presume that you probably have that in front of you, and I'll give you a moment if you'd like to take a look at that. It's the photographic record that he included with his letter. Pages 24 and 25 of Exhibit C, which are figures 23 and 24, show what is now the JJWZ Fish House, labeled in that letter as the Kelly Boathouse. And if you look at it, you can see that included is a landing as a part of the historical structure that was grandfathered. You can see the landing, it's in the same relative place as the landing that's subject to this variance. A ramp, of course, was not needed at that time because of the elevation. It was basically resting right on the wetlands itself. The difference now is that the landing will be elevated to current 2018 FEMA standards, standards which were not in place even when Mr. O'Reilly received his permits and planning board approval, but to which the fish house was ultimately constructed. It would have been good if Mr. O'Reilly had shown that landing when he first went to the planning board, but that's why we're here now asking for this variance. The variance will only return the structure to its historical original design. The fish house was approved by DEP and the planning board in 2008 and constructed between the months of August and December in 2016. Attorney Bannon listed a number of things in his most recent letter that he assumed happened during the construction of the fish house. And he assumed that it required vehicles and other equipment delivering the beams, framing the building, and so on. The truth is that as required by the findings of fact number 6 in the 2008 planning board approval, which if you're looking for it was attached to my November 9th letter, the pilings were installed by hand tools, without the use of mechanized equipment of machinery, with no vehicles, whether designed for on-road or off-road operation. None of them access the premises or over the right-of-way. In order to accomplish this, as part of the 2016 construction, a temporary 8-foot by approximately 200-foot wooden boardwalk was laid down on the marsh, piece by piece, all by hand. Large items were then rolled down the boardwalk to the site on large metal rollers or carried by hand. All of the deliveries to the site, including the beams, was done by many young bodies and a great deal of manual labor. No vehicles. The long beams, which have led to the notice of violation because they extend beyond the structure, were actually not planned for, but they were what was available from the lumberyard at the time, and rather than cut them off, they were used to support a landing for safe access during the construction process. It was contemplated they would be left in place pending this variance request, and that cutting them off and then constructing a landing would require driving more pilings into the marsh. This was discussed with both the CEO and with DEP, who agreed that should the variance be approved, this was a more environmental way to support the landing. Everything during construction, again, was done by hand, and everything was raised into the structure by use of staging, use of the landing platform, and again, a lot of manpower. The CEO visited the site, and should you want, I'm sure he can confirm that as well. The wooden boardwalk is no longer there. Material, equipment, and other supplies will need to be hand-carried down the right-of-way and then somehow be brought into the fish house. 911 accessibility will also be needed. When Bob Zook first spoke with the town about the fish house, he was told the town had put a lot of work into the permitting and that it should be built as approved, and the town wanted the fish house to be built. Bob recalls a conversation with the CEO about access, not even realizing at the time there was a setback issue, but being told that they would cross that bridge when they got to it. Again, the CEO is here and could address that as well if need be. The fact is, historical access to the fish house was via a landing in virtually the same location as the elevated landing being asked for here. The planning board approval was limited to a fish house use, and a fish house is one of the few permitted uses for this parcel. Without access from the road, however, the structure is virtually valueless. There is no beneficial use to which it can be put. It cannot yield a reasonable return. It cannot be resold. Why would somebody want to buy it if they can't use it? They can't access it. Without access and an area to safely enter and stage supplies, it is simply a photo op for tourists. As a side note, and again to respond to one of Attorney Bannon's allegations, as Mr. Zook had been told by both the town and DEP, and it should be obvious, fit and finish simply doesn't matter. It does not matter that the fish house is not only functional, but a pleasant structure to view and to work in. It does not matter that Mr. Zook had attractive supplies from other structures he had torn down and so repurposed them into this fish house. It does not matter that after a long, hard day working on the boats or traps, the Zook's fishermen's sons or other fishermen who are using the fish house have a comfortable place to relax. Like the question of the structure's original use, it is simply a non-issue. With respect to the ramp, Article 8.3.A.3 and A.3.B.4 of the ordinance, I don't know if you have it in front of you, but if you do, again, I'll give you a moment to take a look at that. It addresses access to first floors for non-conforming structures, such as the fish house. The ordinance provides that even a permanent staircase constructed with a fixed location on the ground is not considered an expansion of a non-conforming structure, and that the only expansions of non-conforming structures are subject to lot line or water body setback requirements. In other words, even if the board were to consider the ramp to be a structure, which I will assert is not, first floor access, which the ramp will provide, does not require a variance for the lot line setback. Furthermore, the term "together with" should not be interpreted as Attorney Bannon is suggesting. Rather, "together with" means that both must apply. The ordinance is not written as A, anything built for support, shelter, or enclosure of persons, animals, goods, or property of any kind, or B, anything constructed or erected with a fixed location above, below, or upon the surface of the ground. Together with implies that the two sections go, as it says, together. For example, what if somebody wants to rotate the placement of a bird feeder in various trees that are within the setback? Is that a structure? It's built for the shelter of an animal, but it doesn't have a fixed location on the ground. It's temporarily hung from a tree. What if somebody leans a ladder or erects construction staging within a setback? Is that a structure? Would it require a variance? Under Attorney Bannon's analysis, it is, and yes, you would. The exceptions at 6.1 do not support his arguments either. That section cannot possibly list every conceivable retractable awning-like use out there. Retractable awnings on houses are listed because they are common. The retractable ramp is, however, very much the same as a retractable awning, as it only temporarily extends the footprint of the structure to which it is attached.
Okay.
Also, as noted previously, is providing access to the first floor of the fish house. So even if it were a structure, it would not require a variance. Simple common sense needs to apply here. In order to be able to continue the commercial fish house use, or actually use it as a commercial fish house, the structure has not yet been used as a commercial fish house. It can't because there's no access. Reasonable and safe access from Langsford Road must be provided. This application represents the most minimal reasonable access by maintaining one half of a landing platform that was used to reconstruct the fish house, which landing would be accessed by a retractable aluminum or wood, I believe in this case wood, gangway. The 8 by 12 foot landing platform and retractable gangway provides safe and reasonable access into the fish house for lobster gear, equipment, and materials, as well as providing safe access for emergency responders should the needs arise. Whereas without the gangway and landing platform, it is impossible to reasonably and safely transport the necessary tools and equipment associated with the operation of a commercial fish house from Langsford Road and into the fish house itself, and likewise impossible to provide reasonable access for emergency responders. The entire purpose of the property and its sole permitted use are unusable without the variance. Excuse me. Second, the need for a variance is due to the unique circumstances of the property and not to the general conditions of the neighborhood. And just stepping back for a minute, I know Attorney Bannon has raised the assessed value of the property. The assessed value of the property doesn't really mean anything if the property is valueless and cannot be resold. If it cannot be used, there is no use for the property, no reasonable use, no reasonable return. Second, the need for a variance is due to the unique circumstances of the property and not the general conditions of the neighborhood. To start off, and again for the record, Attorney Bannon continues to assert that JJWC parcel may not be legal. Maybe it was never legally buildable. That ship sailed. In 2018, when the planning board approved the construction of the fish house, the DEP approved the reconstruction, the town issued the building permits, none of which were appealed. During the 5 long, noisy months of construction from August to December, the Zooks got 0 complaints and no one challenged those permits. It's a permitted, legal, non-conforming structure, period, end of story. There is no getting around the fact that most of the commercial fish houses in Cape Porpoise have disappeared or have been converted to other uses that are not commercial in nature. It's also no secret that the Ridland lot and the Hutchins lot, despite long ago historical use, cannot ever be built on. If there was any question as to the ordinance, Mr. Ridland's tax card makes that clear. The only lot in the entire area that can support the construction of use of a commercial fish house is the JJWZ lot. The only fish house structure, whether the use is still commercial or not, in that entire neighborhood that you cannot simply enter by a door on Langsford Road is the JJWZ fish house. It's an entirely unique circumstance for the lot and the use, and its circumstances, the unique circumstances that we are talking about here. The circumstances are also unique in that the only access from Langsford Road is over a 12-foot wide right-of-way over which only 2 properties have deeded access, and where only JJWZ has deeded access to the portion of the right-of-way that abuts the property, its own property, the JJWZ property, and is subject to the setback variance. Mr. Ridland has no deeded access rights over the right-of-way in front of the JJWZ house. Nobody else has deeded access rights, only JJWZ has those rights. Mr. Ridland's access stops at his property line. In all, there could hardly be another set of circumstances as unique as these. Third, the granting of the variance will not alter the essential character of the locality. Cape Porpoise has been and continues to be an active commercial fishery. It's a working waterfront. the town's comprehensive plan for Cape Porpoise is to remain a livable fishing community. One of the town goals is to preserve the residential town with an active fishing industry. The fish house is a permitted commercial fish house, and it can be seen in the photograph in our original submission, the August 26th submission. There was a picture there, and it showed that the landing platform barely protrudes from the fish house itself, and then only toward that deeded right-of-way over only which JJWZ has access. Furthermore, in its 2008 approval and conclusions, the Planning Board has already determined that the fish house will not have a detrimental effect on the use and peaceful enjoyment of abutting property as a result of noise, vibration, fumes, odor, dust, glare, or other cause. The fish house is a permitted and even desirable water-dependent use in Cape Porpoise. Not only will it not alter the essential character of locality, it is the essential character of the locality. Lastly, the hardship is not the result of action taken by the applicant or prior owner. As noted, the location of the fish house predates zoning. There was no front yard setback, no setback to the right-of-way, nothing that required any kind of setback analysis when the fish house was constructed 100 years ago. Furthermore, while the reconstruction of the fish house was in keeping with the footprint of the original structure and built to today's FEMA standards, the town and DEP standards, and the permit requirements, when the structure was initially built in the 1900s, it would have been built much closer to the then existing ground level. And you can see that in the picture in Mr. Bannon's submission that I referred to earlier. And as noticed previously, the original structure had a landing in the same relative location as the landing for which this variance is sought. The intent and the result was to build a historic, accurately sized structure in the same location. Access to the structure was always by way of the right-of-way, and there was no reason to think that this would change. Even the ordinance recognizes that with respect to non-conforming structures, access to the first floor can be had without violating the setback. And moving supplies and equipment up a steep ramp to the fish house requires a safe landing platform, just as a steep set of stairs would require a landing at the top. There was therefore no action taken by the applicant or prior owner that created this hardship. It was understood that access would be needed and that it would be in the area that historically existed. In light of the above, JJWZ respectfully asks the board to grant its variance request. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. To the extent I cannot, I would ask Mr. Zook or Attorney Libby to respond. And I am hopeful that I will have an opportunity to respond to Attorney Bannon or other public comment if that is necessary. And I thank you.
Thank you, Attorney. So now I'm going to go to the board for questions. And April, I'm going to start with you. Do you have any questions of the applicant's representative?
Not at this moment, but I may later.
Later. Wayne Fessenden, do you have any questions of the applicant?
I do. And before I start, once again, I want to make it known that Sandra Gray is part of the, I have two lawyers that I work with, and I've also worked with Sandra in the past. But if there's any conflict believed by the board, it may be a good time to bring it up.
I don't have one. Do you want us to take a vote on that? You use the firm of Woodman Edmonds, et cetera?
Yes, and have for a lengthy period of time, and I brought this up before. We didn't take a vote, we just
Yeah, I don't
made
have
it
a
known.
problem. Does anybody have an issue with this?
I don't have an issue.
Okay, I let it be reflected that all the members of the board shook their heads negative. So why don't you proceed?
Okay. All right, first question. Sandra, in your narrative for the application, it refers to 8 by 12 landing, and it is on number 7, and it's also in the narrative. In the Lower Village survey, on the very last page of that survey that you have provided, it states that the proposed landing platform is 6 by 12. And since we've been following the survey and the representation of what is there or what is proposed, it's not a huge
I'd say
difference.
that's a good catch. And since the structure's 12, I would say that's actually correct, and that it is a 6x12 landing platform.
Okay.
And I apologize for the confusion.
And also in the survey, of the 2017, I believe that would be the updated survey. It shows no beams extended.
I'm sorry, which page are you on?
Let's see. As Paul stated, we've had hundreds of pages, so let's
Yes.
get the exact page. So in my notes, I'll come back to that, Sandra, because
I think if you look at that same page that you were talking about, it shows the existing 12x12 beam there.
yeah, in the last page of it, it does, yes.
Right, and then in the first, in the first one, you can just sort of see it by it. It's like there's a line that is in the platform that represents the location of the beams.
Okay.
There was a third beam, and as you can see, that third beam is to be removed.
And I also notice, and without having seen the site up close, it seems to appear that there are boards over the beams, making up a platform that would exist today.
That is correct, and that is why we are here. That was what was put there for the construction. It was left in place while we go through this process. This process got delayed somewhat because of COVID. We were hoping to actually start the process last spring, and then there was an additional delay, but that was just left in place. When DEP first came down and looked at it, it had been their suggestion that that half of the platform and that third beam be removed, and that we just use the half of the platform for a landing and for access. That was DEP's request, and this followed through from that. And I just apparently the beams have no decking on them right now.
Okay. So we're hearing from the gallery that there's no beam.
There's no decking on them right now.
No
and
decking
yes.
on it right now.
And I have been there more recently, and there is no decking on there right now.
I'll come back to it, Paul. I'm good for right now.
Okay. Karen Schlegel, Karen, do you have any questions at
No
this?
questions right now.
Okay, Kevin McDonald. Kevin, your microphone is muted.
I had folks making noise in the background. So I had a couple of questions. So I guess my first is, when this was built, could it have been re-permitted and built to allow sufficient space for the platform to meet the setback?
So as you know, it was originally permitted in 2008. The DEP had already granted one extension, which was close to expiring. The town was requiring it to be built. So at the time that JJWZ purchased it, they were under the gun to get it constructed quickly, and they were instructed to build it exactly per the approved plans. So there was no opportunity at that time to start over and start reconstructing it.
Okay, let me ask it just a little bit different. If there was sufficient time, with that piece of property, would it have been built to meet the setback requirements?
You know, I think that from the beginning, from my understanding, the concept was to reconstruct a historically correct structure there, reconstruct as close as, certainly to size, of the existing structure that was there. It was always accessed from the right-of-way. The right-of-way, again, the only person with access is the person that owns that parcel. I think it was just it was accessed, it would continue to access. It ended up being a lot higher in the air, I think even than was contemplated in 2008, because the FEMA regulations changed after that. It was elevated even higher in the end by the time it was built by JJWZ. So it was just in unfortunate circumstance, which is why we're here right now. Again, I think if you look at that picture and see that there was a landing there at one point, could that have been shown by Mr. O'Reilly back in 2008? That would have been great. But that's why we're here. We want to replace that original landing.
Okay, another question, as I went through it, it wasn't clear to me. The equipment that we're talking about bringing into the building, can that be transported to the building by water?
Possibly. Possibly, I would guess.
As I'm going through the 4 prongs, that was a question that came to my mind.
But they won't always, it's, the water, it's not accessible by water all the time. It will only be accessible at high tides. It's not always accessible. So to get anything in there other than a high tide would be impossible without that front access. And again, one of the concerns is 911 accessibility, which if somebody were in there.
Okay, so that brings me to my last question. So actually transporting from Langsford Road to the building, you mentioned the fact that they had to put in special, wooden.
Yeah, there was a wooden boardwalk that was laying right down on the marsh. That was put in piece by piece by hand. They put in one piece, put in the other piece, put in the other piece. So the whole thing was laid by hand. Large items like the beams were put on metal rollers and rolled down that boardwalk. A lot of things were hand carried down that boardwalk. And then at the end of it, they had that platform that they had built for construction purposes on the beams, and they had staging going up to it. And my understanding, and I've seen pictures, there were several young men helping out at the time that would help lift things up the staging, onto the platform, and then into the building.
So without the platform in place now, what's the proposed method for getting this heavy equipment from Langsford Road to
There
the
isn't.
ramp?
There is no method without the platform. That's why we're here. There is a ladder. There's a ladder that goes straight up, and it's not something that you want to go up and down a lot. And there's no way to carry items up over that ladder. Not equipment, not gear.
And from Langsford Road to the platform?
It's just a walkway in the marsh.
Okay, all right. Those were my questions. Thanks.
Wayne, did you, I'm sorry, April?
Can I ask a couple of questions now?
Yeah, April Defoe, go ahead.
Who actually owns the right-of-way?
The fee in the right-of-way is actually the town's, but the right-of-way is subject to deeded access for these 2 parcels. So the town got the piece of land together with the right-of-way subject to the deeded rights of access for these parcels.
Uh-oh, something happened to me.
Anything else, April?
My other question was, when Mr. Zook purchased this property, how much did he pay for it?
I don't know, and I'm not sure that that's really relative, to be honest.
Well,
I don't even know the answer to that question.
one of the sections of the variance is a reasonable rate of return. And so, how much Mr. Zook has invested in this property is, I think, relevant.
Well, I mean, the reasonable rate of return is whether the property can have any use without the variance. So the only use for that property, which was approved by the planning board, is this fish house. It's a commercial fish house for commercial use. Without access to it, there is no use. So there is really no value. They can't turn around and sell it. It's got no value to them at this point. It doesn't matter what they paid for it. Right now, today, it has no value. It has no significant value to them.
But Mr. Zook bought it with nothing on it, and it had value to him.
He bought it with the permits. He bought it with the permits in place, knowing that he can construct a commercial fish house on it. So that was the value. It was the commercial fish house that was the value.
Okay.
He wouldn't have bought it just as an unbuildable piece of marshland. He built it because of the commercial fish house use.
Right, and there's a building there. So,
Which can't be used right now. He can't get an occupancy permit for it. He needs access to it. He needs to, in order to use it for the purpose that it needs to be used for, which is a commercial fish house use. Whoop, she bounced off. Should I hold off? April's gone from the,
Go right ahead.
oh, back on. Can you hear me, April?
She's still connecting to audio.
We can't hear you yet, April. You need to unmute. There you go.
okay, I'm back. Yes?
Go ahead, Sandy.
Sorry.
I mean, the question is, can it yield a reasonable return if the variance isn't granted? Without the variance, nobody's going to buy it. They can't use it for the one purpose that it was permitted for. It's only permitted, the planning board approved a fish house on that property. And in order for them to be able to use it as a fish house, they have to be able to get supplies and equipment into the fish house. And they need to be able to access that from Langsford Road, as the access from the water is going to be very limited in time.
All set,
All
April?
set.
Wayne, did you want to ask now or you want to come back later?
I'll come back later.
I have a few questions, somewhat random. So it was constructed in 2016, and prior to 2016, what was physically on the lot?
As I recall, and Bob Zook may be able to answer this better, there were pilings there. I know that the original ones that Mr. O'Reilly had put in place needed to be redone because they were done incorrectly. I believe that those were in place when Mr. Zook purchased the property.
Okay. And when, in answer to Kevin's question about access, bringing materials to this site by water, it seems to me, I just want to make sure I get your answer clear, that you said that could be done, but it would be limited in time to periods of high tide.
High tide and good weather. I mean, accessible weather, so it's a very limited amount of time that they would be able to get in there. So if they wanted to get in there and work on their traps and work on those things and get their equipment in there to do that, they would have to, wait until the conditions were exactly right to come in by boat, which really limits the amount of time that this is functional.
Well, I thought that, as I understood the application, the need for your variance is to accommodate a platform, and the platform is necessary to bring in equipment, and the list of items wasn't very detailed, but equipment, traps, things of that fashion. So it's the beginning of the process, and then they would be used while they were in the fish house, or when traps came back in, or when nets came in, something like that, right?
Right.
And so if that's the case, then they need to be brought in one time primarily, and then they would stay there and be used from there and occasionally replenished.
I think that I think again that maybe Mr. Zook would be the better one to answer this. My understanding is that there's constantly, I mean, they're constantly being worked on. They're constantly bringing items in. I know that they're working out of, I think, a garage at the house right now, and it's constant in and out with items and supplies. So if you want a list of what those supplies are and how often they're needed to be brought in, I think Mr. Zook might be the better one to answer that question.
I think I probably don't need that, but expand that a little bit where you're saying, what are they doing currently? They're working out of a garage, and where's the garage?
There's a garage.
Okay. And just for clarity, so the property was constructed because it's owned by an entity, JJ
WZ.
WZ.
Mhm.
And the principals of that, though, is Mr. Zook and maybe others as well?
It's Mr. Zook. I believe just Mr. Zook.
And then there was construction, was it constructed by Mr. Zook's construction company?
Yes.
Okay, if prior to the construction, prior to the commencement of the construction, was it known that a deck would be necessary?
It was known that access would be necessary, and safe access would be necessary. I think it was just that it was always traditionally accessed from the right of way, and it was just assumed that it would continue to be accessed that way. And again, I know that Mr. Zook went in and had some conversations with the code officer prior to buying it, and was under the understanding that access would be dealt with in due time, and that it wasn't really an issue. So
Well, the access to the
when
property,
he purchased it.
the access to the access, just for clarity, the right of way exists, and that's the primary access down to the structure. And when you're talking about access there, you're talking about from ground level into the structure. That's the access you're talking about.
Correct.
From
Yes.
ground level into structure. So the plans for the property showed an elevated structure, correct?
Right.
So again, I ask, given that the structure was elevated at all times in the plans, and the structure did not exist prior to 2016, prior to the acquisition by the applicant, it seems to me that it had to have been known that if a platform was going to be required because of the intended use of the property, that had to be known prior to construction. And are you saying to me, you're not certain that it was known prior to construction?
So the platform was actually a result of those beams that were serendipitously provided and that were longer than the structure. And it became a convenient place to place the platform on. They always knew that access was going to be required. Access that steep requires a platform. It was a permitted structure. It had DEP approval, it had town approval, it had a building permit, it was ready to build. The understanding was that access would be made available when the time came. And the original plans, the 2008 plans, didn't really have the original 2008 plans were pretty inadequate. They didn't really have the elevations, they didn't really show a lot. It wasn't until after Mr. Zook got it and did a full survey on it that the setback lines became available and noticeable.
But the elevation was known prior to that time, right? Are you saying that the need for the elevation was discovered after the acquisition of the property?
The need for the height of it was actually after, because again, the FEMA changed between 2008 and 2018. So it ended up being higher than it was originally thought. And
So just for clarification for me. So the elevation of the structure when the property was acquired and the permits that existed, they didn't show plans for this structure to be this high? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, the original structure was not going to be that high because the flood zone changed it. And my understanding is that when Mr. Zook went in to get the building permit, he was informed by the code officer that it had to go higher because of the new flood zone regulations. So it went higher.
Okay.
When Mr. Zook first got it, there was no survey. There was no indication of where any setback lines were. It was a permitted structure without a survey.
Did he obtain a survey prior to the construction?
He obtained the survey after the pilings went in, and you'd have to confirm that with him, I'm afraid.
I'm curious, this is kind of a hypothetical, but if this had been brought to the zoning board seeking a variance prior to any construction, if no construction had been done and the applicant brought in a request for a setback, would you think that that would have been something that could have been granted at that time if the structure had not been built already?
I do, because if you look at it, there was a landing there. That the location of the fish house is in the same location that it was when it was its original structure. If you look at the picture, you can see that there is a landing behind it. So it would have actually just been a part of the non-conforming structure had it been brought to the board's attention at that time.
But the plans that had been prior approved had no landing on it, and it did
Right.
conform to setbacks at that time.
Although the setbacks at that time weren't visible because there was no survey. It was basically, it was just rebuilt to the same location that it was in. It was a non-conforming structure rebuilt in the same location that it had been before. And I believe that that's how it was approved.
Is the structure non-conforming because of setbacks?
The structure
If you
is,
refer to it as
no.
non-conforming, I'd like to know why it's designated as non-conforming.
I think because you couldn't go in today, if that structure hadn't been there, you wouldn't have been able to go in today and get a building permit to build a fish house on that parcel. It's only permissible because it was an existing structure that's located there. So the structure was non-conforming because of the location. It was rebuilt to where it was. It's a reconstruction of a non-conforming structure.
Okay, but I'm still trying to determine, is it that non-conformity because of all of the wetland designation and the wetland setbacks, as opposed to non-conforming because of setbacks? That's my question.
Yes.
Okay. Can the property be used to store kayaks or rowboats or things of that fashion at this time?
My understanding is that you can put, I think the planning board added or agreed to a letter that was sent in after the original approval that said that there could be some boat use there also. I'll go back and look at that. But the approval was for a fish house. And not only was the approval for a fish house, the town's comprehensive plan talks about fish houses being there. The permitted use, a boathouse use is not a permitted use in that zone right now.
But
A fish house use is a permitted use.
But as you were saying, that the planning board did allow for that in a subsequent writing or in the...
I am taking a look right now, sorry.
Number 10 on the findings of fact.
Yeah.
So,
No electricity, no plumbing. Storage of
well,
fish-
also, so there was a letter, and it's in my my submission. It was Exhibit A to the original planning board approval. It said the personal use of small boats is inclusive of family, friends, and guests.
So it is specifically allowed for personal kayaks and personal small boats. And then you've just said personal, what did you say, personal use and guests?
Family, friends, and guests is consistent with the use since 1979.
So that would be a permitted use of the property today.
If you look at the site plan review is for a fish house reconstruction. That was what it was permitted by the town, and certainly that's what it was permitted by DEP for. Clearly, the fish house use.
Hey, Paul, can I ask another question?
Yeah, go, who was that?
Kevin.
Kevin.
Hey, so looking at item 10 and the finding of facts, from the planning board. So the very first sentence says the applicant's use of the structure will be limited to water-dependent uses. Sandra, can you help me with what that interpretation is? Water
It
dependent?
means that the use has to have access to the water. So a fish house that is going to be used by commercial fishermen for loading and unloading lobster traps and other fishing gear and repairing them and working on them is a water-dependent use.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I have a last question, Sandra.
Sure.
I don't know what the name of this is, but I've seen it in front of some barns. It's kind of like an arm that comes out that has sort of a winch on it. I don't know what the proper terminology is. Wayne, do you know what the proper terminology is for that?
Yeah, a crane.
The crane?
Oh,
Well,
a hoist.
a hoist.
Hoist.
Thank you, a hoist. Wouldn't a hoist be a possibility here that was adjacent to the structure that would swing out like hoists do, that could lift up items and then bring them over to the door?
It certainly wouldn't allow for the public safety aspect of it. It certainly wouldn't allow for if somebody were injured in there, if there was a fire in there, for emergency access from the road into the fish house. I again would need to rely on Bob Zook for this. My understanding is they bring traps up, they bring other things up that they set down on the platform. I don't know whether everything could be brought up by a hoist or not, but it certainly wouldn't address the safety access issue.
Thank you.
And I believe that that's why the ordinance, when it talks about if you have a non-conforming structure, access to the first floor isn't subject to that setback requirement, is because of the necessity for safety access to a first floor of a structure.
Thank you. Anything else? Anybody else question at this time for the applicant? Okay. Sandra, we're going to put you back into the audience if Dave would do that. And then, let's see. You got to forgive me for trying to scan through this. I'm a righty and I don't have use of my right hand at that time. Okay, I don't see any other hands with regard to the applicant. So we're going to move along. So at this time, I'm going to ask that any direct abutter wishes to be heard or their representative, please raise your hand. But before that, I want to note that the direct abutters are identified in the application, and I will just read the last names, but that would be Hutchins, Eaton, Mooney, Ridlin, and then the town itself, as well as Ellis. So do any of those parties wish to be heard at this time? Right. I see one hand, and that's John Bannon. So would, Dave, could you bring John up to the panel?
You want to see him, or do you just want to allow him to talk?
I want both, actually.
Okay. I am promoting John to panelist. It takes a few seconds.
Yep. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you but can't see you, John.
I don't know why. Well, I'll try that. There we go. Okay. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm John Bannon on behalf of Gary Ridlin, who's a direct abutter to the JJWC property. I first wanted to advert to the oddness of what we're doing here tonight in the pandemic era. You folks are literally inviting us into your homes to do your work. Boy, that's generous. And we're all invading your privacy because we want things from you. So I first off want to thank you very sincerely for that. Living in odd times, and this is a big burden on you, and thank you for taking it on. I took to, well, Paul at least knows me fairly well, or at least knows that given the chance, I will speak at enormous length.
Which I trust you're not going to do tonight, John.
Well, I brought that up in particular because that is specifically what you asked me not to do, Paul. And the board has already been very patient with reading. I haven't added up how many pages I submitted to you, but more than anyone else. And if the board has, as you say, taken the time to read my materials, that's more than I could ask for most people. So I don't feel any great need to make a speech here. It's kind of a sad proceeding in a way that there is a level of tension about these issues that seems to exist. And I don't really want to make it worse by anything that I would say in addition to my comments in writing. But I did want to address a couple of things. I did not catch exactly which of the photographs in the photographic record are said to show a landing on the Kelly boathouse. Did anyone else write that down? Well, whether you did or you didn't, I've studied these photographs until my vision has been blurred and I've been cross-eyed. I can assure you there is no landing on the Kelly boathouse. There never ever was. I think what you may be seeing is debris in the background of the Kelly boathouse that could be confused as being attached to it. But if in particular, I'm looking at, and it doesn't matter whether there was a landing on the Kelly boathouse in any event for the purposes of this, but if you look at figure 18 from the 1960, that's one of the clearer shots of the Kelly boathouse, which shows no landing at all. 57 is kind of distant. 53, or pardon me, figure 16 taken in 1953, that's really quite clear. There's no landing there. There's something in the background. I don't know what it is, but it's not a landing. So I don't want to get into a big fight about that, but I assure you that there isn't. The other issue that I get into only reluctantly because it puts me in an adversarial, more adversarial position towards towards JJWC than I would like right now, is that I don't understand the allegation that has from my perspective, or my perception, come up tonight for the first time that this structure has never been used for anything before and has never been used for any commercial fishing purposes or anything of that sort. That has always been my understanding of what the applicants were saying, that the existing use of this structure, its present actual use, is that of a commercial fish house, which we dispute. But if you look at the first page, it's not my imagination, at least. If you look at the first page of the variance application, there's questions 4 and 5 are descriptions of the existing and proposed use of the property. The existing use of the property is commercial fish house for building, repairing, and storing fishing gear and supplies. The proposed use is the same thing. I don't think it's my imagination. I think this is what the applicants have been saying, both to the board and the various boards and to the DEP. But let's take that at face value. Let's take that as true. It cannot credibly be said, I am sorry to say, that the structure and the JJWZ property is not being put to any beneficial use. That is the standard. That's the first standard for an undue hardship variance. I don't know why the property is equipped the way it is now, apparently for residential purposes primarily. I don't know why JJWZ invested so much into this structure to make it livable and usable, and can still say that essentially that the structure is lying dormant. It's not. So in terms of present beneficial use, that's just, I'm afraid, not supported by what the applicant has said to this board and to other boards in the past. But even if there had never been any use of this structure to date after it was built, the board has already adverted to the fact that other kinds of structures could have been built, smaller structures that didn't need front setback variances. It could be used for the storage of kayaks. It could be used for any number of purposes right now besides commercial fisheries. The town is valuing the building. Well, I quoted what the number was. I'm not going to even bother to look it up, but it's, I believe on the order of 200, or the total property is on the order of $250,000. Something beneficial is going on there. And that's all that's required. That's all that a municipality is required to provide somebody is a reasonable return. Not exactly the return they want, not the exact use they want, but a beneficial one. Now, my clients who have the property next door consider their property very usable and very beneficial to them, and there's nothing built on it. What's beneficial is to a certain extent in the eye of the beholder, but it's also a question of law, because the Maine Supreme Court has said that, pardon me, I do apologize for my voice, that recreational uses are a sufficiently beneficial return. So that being the case, and I'm not going to repeat my arguments, I've already gone too far doing that already. Use is ongoing now that is beneficial. That by itself defeats the variance request. I'm not going to talk about the essential character of the neighborhood, although I already wrote about that. or, but I will talk about unique circumstances. The plain fact is the Ridland lot next door is served by a right-of-way, same right-of-way. If the Ridlands want to put a structure within 20 feet of the right-of-way, they need a variance, just like JJWZ. So the property as a matter of law is not unique. And finally, just briefly, about self-created hardship. I understand the impulse by JJWC to separate itself from the actions of Mr. O'Reilly, but it can't. None of this happened by accident. Nothing happened by compulsion. Nothing forced Mr. O'Reilly to apply for a building permit for a building that had the access that it does. Nobody forced JJWZ to build the structure without access or to equip it to the extent it has. Well, that's enough. I have, I think, perhaps abused my right to speak here more than you would have liked. But if you do have questions about what I've written about, I would be glad to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks, John. April, do you have any questions of Attorney Bannon?
I don't think so, not right now.
Wayne?
No.
Karen?
No questions.
Kevin?
I'm all set.
I have one, John. Regard to the second prong of the test, the need for the variance is due to the unique circumstances of the property and not to the general conditions of the neighborhood.
Right?
When this board looks at that requirement, are we, is it in your opinion, are we to look at the subject property without structure or with
Yeah.
structure?
Without it. The law court has actually ruled on that. I'm trying to think of whether that's a case I won or lost. It's been, I could have, but the court has said that whether there's a structure on a parcel is not what the board is looking at. You're looking at the property, the lot. Are the circumstances of the lot unique in the neighborhood? And if they're not, then a variance needs to be denied. The circumstances of the structure or the manner in which the property has been developed is irrelevant.
Thank you. Hold on for 1 second. When the second question, I'm asking you a couple of questions of law. Second question is when, and again, I'm just asking for your opinion. When the board reviews this application, is the board, in your opinion, to look at this as the developed parcel? So this is sort of an after the fact kind of application, because at least the beams are there, if not some of the boarding for the platform. Or is the board to look at this as if the beams and the platform are not there when it does its analysis?
The board should presume that the beams are not there.
And that's based on case law?
Yes. Well, the board could also assume that there's nothing there. But at the very least, the board should not be considering whether or not particular excess beams were attached to the parcel in determining whether there's undue hardship or not, or whether the applicant should be allowed to use them and thereby avoid a notice of violation. That's not the board's role.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have anything? Okay, thank you, John.
Thank you.
Dave, you can put John back in the audience. And I don't see any other hands up with regard to the list of abutters that I read, that it was provided to us by the applicant. So, seeing no other hands to make input from the list of direct abutters, I'm going to ask if there's any members of the general public that wish to address the board at this time. And I am seeing none. I'll give that another second just because of technology and my limitations. But I see none. So now I'm going to move on from the general public. And I'm going to ask now if the Code Enforcement Office wishes to be heard at this time. So since we have him as a kind of silent panelist, if you could unmute yourself, Warner, do you want to address the board about this application? You don't need to, I'm just asking if you care to.
No, I'm just, I'm here and happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Okay, thank you. So does anybody have questions for the code officer? I'll ask first, April?
Sure. So Werner, the applicant has said that there was a big rush to get this built. I want to hear your version of that. Was there a big rush? Were you rushing him to get this building built?
I can't speak specifically as to what would be a rush. What I can tell you is that, we issued, the code office issued a permit that was in the name of the applicant. And, the applicant, prepared, had professional drawings that were prepared, for the construction of the fish house. Now what constitutes a rush? I can't speak to what they considered a rush, to get started. Certainly the project, had, gone on for some time.
If they didn't get something built quickly, were you going to cut them off? Were you going to deny the permit or not renew it? Or was there some reason like that?
So as I said, we issued a permit, in the name of the applicant, and that permit would have followed the timelines as provided within the ordinance, which is a year to begin and 2 years to substantially complete.
When you issued the permit, was there discussion about the fact that there was no stairs or landing platform to access the building from that side of the building?
I can tell you that I issued a building permit that was consistent with what the planning board had previously approved and what previous building permits had previously approved. So what you see in terms of what was provided, in terms of evidence as far as the plans, that's what was approved.
So you didn't have a discussion with Mr. Zook about access to the building?
I don't have a specific recollection, of making any specific assurances, beyond what's been permitted.
Okay. I have another question about the right-of-way. The town owns the right-of-way that we're talking about the setback from, correct?
That's my understanding. I've been told the town owns the underlying fee interest.
So if the town owns that, then anybody can access because there's a park there. I mean, the town allows people to go out onto the property that the town owns. So anybody could use that right of way, not just Mr. Zook and Mr. Ridlin who have it in their deeds. I mean, it's town property, so a townsperson could walk on the right of way. Am I correct?
I mean, I'm not an expert in issues of title. What I can tell you is that piece of property has quite a bit of frontage along Langsford Road. And so the public is, to the best of my knowledge, the public is allowed to, walk onto the property from anywhere along the frontage of Langsford Road. They wouldn't necessarily be specifically drawn or required to walk down, this 12-foot wide right of way.
But they wouldn't be denied from walking down it either, correct?
I mean, I'm not going to speak to whether or not the public would have rights to walk over the right of way. Again, I'm not here to discuss items of title, but there's plenty of frontage along that piece of property on the Langsford Road. There's a multitude of length of area where the public could access that property.
Okay.
Now, whether or not somebody would get kicked off of that narrow 12-foot section, I can't speak to that. Certainly, that's more of a trespass question and not necessarily a zoning question.
Okay,
Good, April.
for now, yep.
Questions, Wayne?
Yep, several. Werner, in the material you provided to us, that the first page is notice of violation. There is, on the second page, so it would be page 4, shows the stated the site plan of the property with as-built structure. If you have that, and then in the top corner, it says it is from Lower Village Survey, July 8th, 2016. So if those of you on the board have that, then in the application for the variance, section B, not sure if you have it, Werner, or not, but in section B, there is also, it was given to us July 8th, 2016. Site plan of property as is built structure, dated July 8, 2016. I'm assuming that they are the same. And they are not the same. They do not show the beams, they do not show the platform in the material you gave us, but it does show it in the material provided by the applicant. I'll give other people a chance to take a look. So what we have in the materials you gave us, Werner, it is a survey, site survey.
I do. I have the two in front of me.
Yep. I'm not asking you to explain the difference, but was the violation based on the difference in this provided material, or was it from looking on site, or a combination of both, or, and again, I'm not asking you to explain why they're different. I think that would be up to the applicant to explain.
No, I mean, I think, so looking at the two documents that we have here, It's not uncommon for, the same site plan to be, used and updated, for different purposes. I think that, in an ideal situation, the site plan within the variance application would have maybe perhaps had an updated date to go along with it, to show the difference of the proposal, on the front.
It does.
The document that I would have provided, that I provided as part of the NOV, is a document that existed prior to the creation of the modification of the site plan that's in your variance packet.
Variance
I mean,
packet
it's a little
dated
bit unclear to see, because I think it's you've got it's had a couple of photocopies.
Dates
Yeah.
appear to be Werner's survey, and his packet is August 1, 2017. Application
Okay.
survey has been updated to August 12, 2020.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. The setback to the right-of-way, you're using the 20 feet, that being access, or it'd be frontage to a road, correct?
That's correct. Yes, we would consider that the front property line.
Do you have examples in the past of stairways access, temporary access, where access was given within a setback?
ADA.
Can you be a little bit more specific? I don't specifically recall any of that nature, Wayne. I mean, each
Okay.
property is unique for sure, in terms of its circumstances.
Small 50 by 50 lot where a second egress was needed, so that the landing would come inside the setback.
I mean, I've seen circumstances where folks have modified, they've modified their homes, in order to do that. The only circumstances that just kind of come quickly to mind are, we've had situations where folks have, and again, this is a little bit different, where they've gotten ADA access, variance requests, for things like, like a handicapped ramp, or something of that nature, that would give an automatic variance for an ADA access. But I'm not, to answer your question, I'm not recalling any, any property specifically. I don't have any that come to mind.
Okay. I'm good for now, Paul.
Thank you. Karen, do you have any questions of Warner?
No, I'm good.
Kevin, any questions of Warner?
Hey, Warner, I have one. When I look at that survey, and you can either see it on section B, a larger version of it, of the submittal for the variance. The corner of that building is right at the setback. So the corner of that building is right at the 20-foot mark. And so I guess my question is, there's a door on the, what is the front side of that building. It's right at the setback. So, when the planning board would have approved it, would there not have been a discussion about, hey, you have an elevated door that's right at the setback? And what's the action that's going to be required for that door?
It's a good question, Kevin. I have, I had opportunity to go back and look at, the videos from that planning board timeframe. And, that was not an issue that was brought up or discussed during that timeframe.
But I mean, the corner of that structure was put right on the two setbacks. It's right on the 20-foot mark and right on the 15-foot. So it's pretty obvious that it was placed right on the setbacks at the time.
Yeah, no, I can tell you that, my recollection from looking at the videos, and this was a recent look at some of those older videos, is that there seemed to be more concern about elevation of the building just in general, as opposed to, the questions that you're asking.
Okay, I mean, it seems obvious that if you're going to use that front access door or something, unless you're doing a ladder straight down to the ground, you're going to encroach on it.
Can I ask Werner one more question?
Yeah.
Werner, if the applicant wanted to build this building smaller, could he?
It's not a question that, that really came up about building a smaller building. I don't recall there being any discussion about that. The planning board approved a specific size, and that's what this was approved for. I think that, if there was any kind of substantial modification to a plan, that, arguably it would have needed to go back through a planning board process.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions, Warner. The planning board application in the materials, when the planning board approval was granted, did you say there was discussion about elevation, or there was not discussion about elevation?
Yeah, so when I recently reviewed, the videos, there was the discussion over building elevation.
Did you know what it needed to be at the time?
So on the original plans, it was spelled out on Bob O'Reilly's plans, made reference to what the building elevation was going to be.
This looks like it was 11 feet above floodplain.
Yeah, so I think if you want to, if you're just trying to get a general sense, so you'll see there's elevation 7, which indicates your existing grade, and then you have an elevation 11, which is base flood, and then elevation 13, which is the floodplain ordinance 2 feet above base flood. And so, so that gives you an indication of what you have there. You've got about 6 feet, between the existing grade to the bottom of the structure.
And that was at the time of the original application to the planning board. That was back then.
That's correct, yes.
And then again, on that original application, there's a schematic by the same company, Maritime Construction and Engineering, that shows the two sides of the structure, each with 3 windows that vary. One side of the structure with no windows, one end of the structure with no door or window. And then the other end of the structure with what I'd call like a barn door, as opposed to a door to a residence, like the equivalent of 2 significantly sized doors abutting each other. That was the south elevation on this schematic. The south side of the building is what I'd call the land side of the building, or the right-of-way side of the building. that right?
That's a good question. I'm looking to see what the original site plan would have called out.
When I look at the plan and the current plan with the application, the side that abuts the right-of-way is the south side. You can tell just by looking at the plan of Lower Village.
Okay.
And so on these schematics, the south elevation on the planning board approval has no door to it, but there is a barn door on what must be the north side. Were the doors and the windows, could they be modified from when the planning board approval was obtained until the permit that you granted?
Yeah, I mean, as a general rule, I would consider, a different style of window or door to be, to be a minor element on a difference with a site plan.
Okay. Was there any prohibition when the applicant came? So the applicant did the applicant pull a new build permit or renew a prior build permit that had been obtained by the prior owner?
We issued a permit in the name of JJWZ.
So that was a new permit. And was there a prohibition at the time for the applicant to go back to the planning board to try to adjust the configuration of the structure to accommodate like a landing? Would there be a prohibition for the applicant to go back at that time?
No, there wouldn't be a prohibition. I mean, most folks don't generally like to go back to planning board just, for the fun of it. But no, there wouldn't be a prohibition to going to the planning board.
Okay. That's all I have. Anybody else have a question for Warner? Okay, thank you, Warner. Dave, you can put Warner back into the audience, please. So I think things have moved along rather well. So if the applicant's attorney, Sandy, if you would like to have time for a brief rebuttal, the board will recognize you. Dave, could you bring up Sandra to both audio and visual?
Yep, she's being promoted now.
Sandra, so we do have a little time for a brief rebuttal on anything you've heard so far, if you'd like.
Yep, thank you. I appreciate that. First of all, I was kind of surprised to hear that you received a packet of information from the code office because I didn't get that. So I'm not sure what was in it specifically, or when you were going back and forth with plans. I didn't have that in front of me. But I do want to respond to a couple of things that Attorney Bannon said. In the application, it talks about the existing use being a fish house. Well, that's what it was approved for. That's what the use should be. It does not have an occupancy permit. It has not been used. He seems to feel that there has been some ongoing use in there. I frankly am a little disturbed about his throwing in there a residential purpose. It's not a residential structure. It's not being used for residential purposes. There's never been a desire by JJWZ or the Zooks for a residential purpose. That building was constructed for a commercial fish house for their sons, who are commercial fishermen, period. No residential use, and I was a little bit disturbed to hear that just kind of casually thrown in there like that. And the building again was built with repurposed materials that came from other buildings that came down. It was not built with all brand new expensive materials. It is lying dormant, no matter how many times Attorney Bennett may say that it is not being used. It can't be used. It's a building, it's a lovely building. It's a beautiful building. It's photographed all over the place. It's been in a lot of publications, but it's not usable. And it can't be used for its permitted purpose as it is right now. As far as the difference in the properties between Ridland property and what may make a unique circumstance or not, the Ridland property is unbuildable. That's in their tax card. That they asked for that to be in their tax card. There's no setback. There's no potential 20-foot setback from the right-of-way because nothing can be built there. It's a totally, the only property along that right-of-way that can have a structure, that can have a fish house, is the JJWZ property. Lastly, the picture, I know in Attorney Bannon's submission to you, he referred to some other earlier photographs. The two photographs that we were talking about were from the 1990s. On both of them, you can clearly see the same protuberance sticking out the back of the fish house. One of them it looks higher than the other one lower. It probably has something to do with the water level at the time. But those were there. So that was a landing that was back there, and that was a historical access to that, what is a fish house now. Whether it was a fish house or a boathouse or some combination of the two doesn't really matter. It is a fish house now. However, it's an unusable fish house now. And I believe that's what I have to say.
I have a question. With regard to the survey, I might be able to shed a little light, Sandra, on, because this is a little unique in that this application came, but it followed a lot of town activity with regard to the property with the planning board approval and prior building permits. So I requested a copy of all the file documents so we could better understand what we were talking about. So that was the request from me long ago, so that the board could become, instead of everybody.
I would have appreciated a copy.
It wasn't a thought on my part, so.
Applicant received
apologize.
everything.
I should have thought of that.
I did not get a submission. I did not get that submission.
I assume you had
Warner's
asked-
notice went to the applicant directly.
But moving on from that.
Oh,
So,
the notice, yeah, no, but whatever the whole entire packet of information that he put together with the past record.
anyway, that was based on my request way back when, and I was doing it to inform the board. I didn't appreciate that it should have been gone around. I assume you had access to the file at the office. So on the survey that Wayne was making reference to before, which is it's a site plan of the property with as-built structure. I'm a little confused as to when the first survey was obtained by the applicant of the property. And can you get any further light on? Because I know the application, the building permit application for obtained by the applicant was, it was granted in August of 2016. And so the survey work was obtained after that and not before that? That's your understanding, Sandra?
The only surveys that I'm aware of that I have, the earliest one that I have is 2017.
Okay, thank you.
So if there was one before that, I'm not aware of it.
No, as you were looking, I noticed the 217 date on that one. Thank you for that. Does anybody have any questions for Sandra while she's up? Karen, no?
Nope.
April, no?
No.
Wayne, no?
No.
And Kevin, no?
No.
All right, thanks, Sandra.
Thank you very much.
If you put Sandra back into the audience, please, Dave. So I'm going to take one more look, even though we've moved along past it. Very good. So with that, I'm going to close the public hearing at this time and turn this matter over to the board. So before we, the board, the way we're going to look at this is that we're going to review each of the prongs of the four-part variance test, and then we're going to discuss each one independently. And then I'll ask for a motion on whether or not the applicant meets the standard. And then I'm going to ask for if there is such a motion, ask for a second, try to identify who makes those motions, and then we'll vote on each one at a time, and we'll go through all four of the prongs. But first, I thought, do you want to just have a general discussion about any of this? I'd like to point out one thing. I know that the applicant can still hear me, and it's probably not relevant, but just as a matter of good form, the bylaws of the board require that, actually it is relevant. We have 5 sitting members of the board here, but our bylaws provide as follows, just quote, decisions on any matter before the board shall require the affirmative vote of a majority of the entire membership of the board. So the board has a membership of 7, which is the 2 members that are not present tonight, which are Jim Fitzgerald and Gordon Ayer. But according to our bylaws, the applicant needs an affirmative vote from a majority of the entirety of the membership. So that would be 7 of the 7 members, you'd need 4 affirmative votes. So it's not simply a majority of the 5 members that are here tonight. It would be 4 of the 5 members that are here tonight. I just wanted to get that on the record. And then before I talk, does anybody want to talk about anything general? Or do you want to get right to the meat and potatoes of the 4-prong test?
I have one general.
Kara.
Just a shout out and a thank you to Lisa Harmon, who helped get all these documents to us and keep a nice track of all the multiple letters that were coming in, email and mail. She did a great job for us.
Yes,
So thank you, Lisa.
I echo that sentiment. April, you want to kick out anything, or you want to wait till we get to the 4 prongs?
I'm waiting.
Wayne?
I took a very close look at what I mentioned of the difference in the 2 surveys, the one that was supplied to us by Warner. And Warner's correct, is if you look very closely, and it's been copied many times, it is a reproduction of the original. So I don't want anyone to think I was accusing anyone of doing anything nefarious.
Good clarifier. Kevin?
No general comments.
Okay, I would like to make one. And that is, I asked, we have access to materials from the MMA. And there was one particular chapter in the MMA materials that pertained to the granting of a variance. And I hope you all studied that greatly. But at any rate, there's one particular section that regards a request for an after-the-fact variance where construction has been done, and then there is a setback issue as a result of the construction, and then an applicant comes in to correct it by means of variance. And so I thought that was somewhat relevant. So it's a little unclear to me if the deck or landing that's at issue has been constructed. What is clear to me is that the beams are in place. And so the beams themselves create a setback violation, and they exist there. And I wasn't entirely clear if it's boarded or not at this time, though I don't think that's relevant because the beams are there and the beams have been constructed, and so they create a setback issue in and of themselves. But this says in the MMA materials, the board should determine in the circumstances where something has already been constructed and it's in violation of setbacks and a variance is being sought to remedy that setback problem. And this had to do with one of the questions I asked Attorney Bannon. It says the board should determine whether the applicant would have been entitled to a variance if she had come to the board before the fact, and only grant a variance if the application satisfies all prongs of the undue hardship test and only to the extent needed. And then it makes reference to a case. The case is Roe v. City of South Portland, which is a 1999 case. And I pulled that case and read that case. And indeed, that's probably one of the big principles that the case stands for, though it stands for some other principles of law as well. But so that suggests that when we look at something like this, we don't necessarily look at it with the building there, but would a variance be granted if the variance wasn't, if the building wasn't there and the request for the variance came first? And I did ask Sandra that question, and she did say that she thought a variance would likely be granted. But I wanted to note that to you because I think we could put on different shades of glasses to look at this from more than one way. So anybody else before we get going? See nothing, then let's start talking about the first matter. So I'd like to begin with discussion. So the first, the variance test is a 4-prong. The first of the prongs is traditionally and in the legal world, the most significant of all of the prongs, and that is the land in question cannot yield a reasonable return unless the variance is granted. There used to be a lot of talk about what does a reasonable return mean, but there's a critical case that's cited in all of the writings on this particular prong, and it's a law court case, I mean Supreme Court case, and it's Twigg versus the town of Kennebunkport, which is a 1995 case. And that reiterates something that has been cited in many cases before it, which says failure to yield a reasonable return means, quote, the practical loss of all beneficial use of the land, end quote. So that's my understanding of when you look at a reasonable return. It doesn't necessarily mean I put in $100, I should get $100 back. It more stands that you have lost, without a variance, you will have practically lost all beneficial use of the land. So I just wanted to throw that out as well. So let's begin our discussion on the reasonable return prong. I'm going to keep going kind of this quasi-alphabetical way, but April, what are your thoughts?
My thought,
Let somebody else gear it up.
what's that?
Do you want to begin?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, go ahead.
My thoughts are that when Mr. Zook bought this property, there was nothing there. He paid money for this property with nothing there.
Can I just stop you for a minute?
Uh-huh.
We told that there were some columns, I can't remember the term for them.
Piling.
Pilings?
There were some pilings, but they needed to be corrected. But they did exist, the posts sticking out of the ground. I just wanted to add that for clarity.
Although,
But there was-
Paul, I think they've been removed.
There was no
at that
roof.
point.
There was no structure at all. There
There's
were
no
no
structure.
beams at all. They were just posts sticking out of the ground.
But I don't think they were posts that he used to construct this structure.
I don't know if he used them or if, and he tweaked them to make them more structurally sound, or if he replaced them. I just wanted to know, when you said there was nothing there, that there was at least this little thing there.
Okay, but there was no building there.
Correct.
It collapsed.
And he definitely spent a considerable amount of money to build the building, even if he used materials from other job sites. So he felt that there was value to this property. And he has a lovely building there right now. I still think that it could be used for his purposes. Like you said, you could put a hoist there and hoist the lobster traps up. He certainly had no problem getting all of the materials to build the building up there without this platform. And even if he just stored lobster traps or boats or kayaks, I mean, the land has value. Maybe not as much value as what he's put into it. Maybe it does. I don't know. I mean, that would only be determined if he tried to sell it. But I certainly think the land has value, and this reasonable rate of return means it has some value, not zero value. And I definitely think that this property has value.
Okay. Before we go on to anybody else, I just want to add one thing, that when Sandra was speaking, she did note, if I remember correctly, that there was staging that was erected when the structure was built. So, you know, there was temporary staging, I presume, you know, the metal bar stuff that gets erected during construction. I just wanted to note that, that there was something there that they could have worked from, according to Sandra's testimony.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And you know, the beams, they were not on the building permit. And I think the only reason that they're there is because that just happened to be the size beams he had, and they stuck out beyond the building. I don't think, I don't know that that was intended to be there. It certainly wasn't on the building permit.
Correct. Okay. Wayne?
As was discussed in the planning board's decision, and in number 10, the applicant's use of the structure will be limited to water-dependent uses. And it's interesting, it says it be limited, making it sound like a negative, when water-dependent uses, there are a lot of those. And it's in a position to be used for that. It may not be accessible at low tide. There may be other conditions that don't allow it to be used for heavy equipment, but it certainly is in a prime location for water-dependent usage. Just because other things were listed after doesn't mean that there are plenty of others. And a knowledgeable buyer and a knowledgeable contractor would understand that.
Okay, thanks. Kevin?
I'm on the same page as Wayne, actually. You know, although the access from Langsford is, I would say, difficult at best. You know, it's just grass and marsh, I think, there. And then, you know, without, you know, some kind of ramp, it's a short, steep ladder. And, you know, they're right at the setback already. So they really can't put any kind of ramp that's going to meet the setback, I don't think. So I guess my point is you can access it by water. and you can get some beneficial use out of it, and that meets the, the reasonable return standard, I think.
Well, that doesn't meet it. It
It
does not meet it.
does not meet it, meaning that they can get it, some amount of return there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Karen?
I ditto some of those same comments and thoughts that I do believe this property still could yield a return on it. The only other thing I just want to make is we're all in support. I'll speak for myself, not all of us. We're all in support of our fishing industry and our lobstermen. We're not trying to, not allow them to do their work. We are just bound by the four prongs of this variance. And we do support our local lobstermen and fishermen totally. So I'm a no on A.
I want to echo that the scope of what's before us is really only if the variance that as requested is granted to accommodate this platform or landing on the south side of the structure. My thoughts are that, I do put on, I do look at this as, is this the practical loss of all beneficial use of the land? And then when we go back to the planning board's approval, and the planning board specifically said in its original approval, I guess, the applicant's use of the structure will be limited to water-dependent uses to wit, the storage of fishing gear and equipment, that's one. Personal kayaks, that's two. And personal small boats, that's three. And I don't know of any limitation on still storing kayaks or personal small boats or utilizing them from the property here. And that in asking Warner if after the property was acquired, if there was a prohibition in going back to the planning board, and this kind of echoes something that you were saying, April, that and maybe Kevin as well, I don't recall, could the structure have been downsized to accommodate a platform that would still conform to the setbacks? Whether or not a survey had been obtained by that time, that's not up to us. That's up to the applicant to determine where the setbacks are and what is allowed and what is not allowed. But I think that the opportunity technically existed to go make a modification so that a variance was not required. And I follow those materials from the MMA and that particular case of Roe versus the city of South Portland that says that we should look at this as if there's nothing there. And if the application came to us while there was nothing there and requested a variance for this landing in the front of the building, I think uniformly, I mean, this is all speculation, but I think uniformly would say, no, you've got room to make the building and landing conform to setbacks. We can't, I mean, it would be illegal for us to grant that variance. And then, while high tide is limited to twice a day, and sometimes water is choppy, I kind of echo Kevin's thought that the property is accessible by boat at high tide, and that might be almost a practical way to get materials, equipment, and the like to the structure by bringing it in by boat as by needing a variance to create a platform. And then finally, I want to say yacht on, Wayne, you corrected me before.
Hoist.
Hoist. Hoist. No, I've seen it on bonds where it can swing out or it can be fixed out, but here it could swing out and there could be a winch or something on the end of it that could lift stuff up and bring it in. So I'm kind of unpersuaded that there must be I'm unpersuaded that the land will not yield a reasonable return without the variance. And I'm equally unpersuaded, it would be more complicated clearly, but I'm unpersuaded that the only way to get fishing gear and equipment into the building is by means of constructing a platform in the front of the building when it's accessible by water, at least from the other. I'm unpersuaded that this is the only way to do it. And Sandra did bring up emergency, first responders, but if there was a winch there, that would be one means of it. And if there was a ladder there, that would be another means of it. I'm just not persuaded by the argument that it must be, absent this, there's no reasonable return. It's a practical loss of all beneficial use. And then just as a practical matter, what they want to do, they can't do without the landing. I'm unpersuaded. Anybody else?
I agree with you, Paul. If you look at the Cape Porpoise Pier, that's how the lobstermen get things in and out of their boats, is with a hoist.
They've got a pulley
You know,
system.
Right, there's a mechanical hoist there that lowers the traps down and lowers their bait down into their boat. Same thing could be done here. I totally agree.
Anybody else?
Paul,
Yeah.
since you brought that up and go in that direction, the ramp, and let me say the difference in my discussion, platform and ramp, not the same thing. The ramp is a very clever design. Yeah.
I'm misspeaking, I guess.
You're fine, Paul. I wasn't, for my purpose in talking about the ramp to access the building. It's a very clever design. It's very simple. And there appears to be no reason why it has to be under the platform. It can be under the building. And there you have your emergency access. What is the difference between landing inside the building or landing on a platform? Obviously, the platform is convenient, and it shows in the survey that only 1/2 of it was to be removed, and the front, or when I say front, towards the water side, it appears it was going to stay. That probably is more of an action in D that we'll get to in a second, but I suspect, I'm only guessing, I would wonder if you were going to the code enforcement officer and asking for, there are temporary structures defined in this town.
In point, because the ramp, there was request was for the deck, but not the ramp. There was no question of the ramp. And there was some discussion in the materials that were submitted by Andy and John that discussed the ramp, and Sandy's point that the ramp was not structure. Ramp was not a part of, so we don't need to make a resolution of that. But if the ramp could come out of the platform, third, I think it's in first, this would be at least half of it, if not more, which is located under the building or in the building and used as an access to directly to the door. Is my point.
Again, we're not, as you said, we didn't ask Werner whether or not a temporary ramp would be allowed in that particular situation, but if it's under the building, it's not stored outside of the original presented to the planning board.
Yeah, and whether or not that ramp would be deemed structure is not a matter before us tonight, so we don't need to decide on that, interpret that. All right, good. Any other points on this particular one? But before I do, I'd like to preface that. I should clearly state the first prong of the variance test verbatim. But I think that the motion should be prefaced by saying something to do with the discussion that we just had, for the reasons that we just articulated.
Am I supposed to be taking notes on all that?
So you want a motion just on the first part?
Only on
Part
the
A.
first prong, that's right.
Do you want me to make the motion?
I would love you to make that motion.
I would like to make a motion that after all of the discussion that we just had, that this is something that we have to vote yes or no on, right?
Right, so that,
That the land in question cannot yield a reasonable rate of return unless a variance is granted. I don't know how I want to word this.
well, do you want it to be in the affirmative that everybody agrees that the applicant meets the test? Or do you want to put the motion in the way that the applicant does not meet the test?
The applicant does not meet the test.
So based on everything based on the discussion of this particular prong of the variance test,
The applicant does not meet the test that the land in question cannot yield a reasonable rate of return unless a variance is granted.
I'd like you to, if I may, just suggest that you change it, not reasonable rate of return, just reasonable.
Reasonable return.
Unless,
Second that.
so the motion was made by April. Who was the second?
Wayne?
Wayne seconded that. So I'm going to, any further discussion on this?
Yeah.
Yep,
You
Kevin?
need to include the land use ordinance section that you're referring to when you make that, or no?
I think that's not a bad idea.
So it's, it's Article 9.2
9B2A.
B. Got it.
It's D as in dog.
9B,
No, B is in
No,
boy.
B is
Oh,
in-
B as in boy. Okay.
9B2A.
Gotcha. Yep.
9B2A.
Very good.
Yep.
All right, so the motion is made, seconded, and amended. Somebody want to second the amendment? Wayne?
I'll second. Second.
Okay, so all in favor of, I'll loosely say, based on the discussions of the board finds that the land in question, the board does not agree with the, never mind, I'm going to withdraw my comment there.
Yeah. Leave it alone.
So the motion, all in favor of the motion offered, raise your hand and say aye, but I'm going to go one at a time. April?
Aye.
Wayne?
Yes.
Kevin?
Aye.
Karen?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. So that's 5-0, that the motion, that the applicant has failed to meet that first prong of the variance test is the position of the determination of the board. Okay, second, we're going to go through all of them. Now, you know that in order to get the variance granted, all four prongs of the variance test must be met. And so the first prong has not been met, but we need to go through the remaining prongs as well. So the second prong is the need for a variance is due to the unique circumstances of the property and not the general conditions in the neighborhood. Anybody on that?
Hey, Paul, my only comment there is there's, the parcel right next to piece of land that we're talking about that has the same setback requirements.
From the same right of way.
from the same right of way. You know, what I don't know is whether you could actually, you know, if it's a big enough piece of land that you could actually put a structure on it. But it
On
would
the
have the same
property.
right of way requirements, right?
Well, the question is it because of the property, the uniqueness of the property, that the variance is required? And not the general conditions in the neighborhood? But the property, if it had been configured otherwise, would not require a variance.
Exactly.
So the need for the variance is due to the unique circumstances of the property and not to the general conditions of the neighborhood. I guess it depends on how you define the neighborhood. The neighborhood would be off Langsford and by the water. It's not a huge neighborhood. I don't know. Karen, what do you think about this?
I don't think the property specific is unique. I mean, everything in Cape Porpoise is unique in its own way, but to grant it a variance because of its uniqueness, I still do not feel as though it meets that criteria.
Wayne?
As was brought up earlier, that perhaps property would mean the land without the building. If you look at it that way, it's not unique. It's like all the other land in the neighborhood with actually with more dry land, and so it has things in common with the other neighborhood, and the building itself is or has been changed or adjusted and creates its own issues.
Kevin?
You asking me?
I am.
Yeah. No, I already spoke on it.
Oh, okay,
I
sorry.
don't think it's unique.
And April, did you already speak on this?
No, but I agree with what's been said. The property itself. There are two properties in front of it that are very similar to it. And then the town-owned property next to it is very similar. It's not really unique if you're just talking the property. And then the building, again, could have been built smaller. It would have fit on the property and it wouldn't have needed a variance.
And I think if we look at this as without the building upon it, which is one way to view this, then it wouldn't be any more unique than any of the other like situated properties.
Right.
All right, let's, if no further discussion, anybody? All right, I'll entertain a motion. Everybody's head goes down.
Go ahead, April. You were good at it.
Motion, Wayne.
I'm taking notes because I gotta type this stuff.
Okay.
Let's use April's. She started with it. It's
How did I start the other one?
Based on the discussion.
Yeah, but, all right, based on the discussion that we just had, I make a motion that the applicant's need for a variance is not due to the unique circumstances of the property and not to the general conditions of the neighborhood.
Very good. Everybody.
second.
Seconded by Wayne. Any discussion further?
You're gonna put in there
Discussion?
for
Uh,
9.2
B, yep,
E2B.
Thank you.
92B,
Oh, yes.
E, yep,
9B2B.
yep.
Very good. We'll do this by voting. All in favor. April?
Yes,
Wayne?
yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
And I vote the same, yes. So that's a vote of 5-0 that the applicant has not met the second prong of the variance test, third prong of the variance test. The granting of the variance will not alter the essential character of the locality. I'll say this, that while there may not be a lot of fish houses constructed down there, but the town does encourage the water-dependent uses. And while it's largely residential, but it's zoned to allow for, well, maybe it's not zoned, but this kind of use is encouraged. I'm not so, my initial inclination is that it will not alter the essential character of the locality. It might not be what some people want to look at when they look out their back windows, but I'm not so sure that it alters the essential character of the locality.
I probably agree with you, Paul, because there are 3 other fish houses right there, right in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's the only fish house in the neighborhood and every other building in the neighborhood is a residential home. There are other fish houses, and one of them operates as a business, Langsford Road Lobster. So I don't think this is really out of line with the neighborhood, I don't think it's going to alter the character of the neighborhood because there are other fish houses there. I mean, we're just talking about our little platform as well, not the whole giant operation of a fish house on the other side that they might want to do, or if they go back to planning board. But the fish house itself is not a whole lot different than the other ones, other
Wayne?
than the fact that it's out in the water.
Yeah, Wayne?
Yeah, if the platforms were allowed by variance, it may change someone's view slightly, but the wording is essential character of the locality, which I agree with you and April. It is part of the character. It is what, and including the planning board statement in number 10 that it is for water related usages. So it would not change the character.
Karen?
I do not feel it changes the character of the neighborhood.
And Kevin?
I agree with all the comments. Yeah, it does not change the character of the neighborhood at all.
So here our sentiment before we vote is that the applicant does meet this particular prong of the variance test. So I'll have a motion that packages that.
Me?
Somebody, we're going to attack McDonald eventually, but he's laying in the reeds right now.
I make a motion that after the discussion that we just had, the applicant does meet the section of the variance ordinance, which is section 9.B.2.C in the land use ordinance, that granting the variance will not alter the character of the locality,
The essential character of
the essential character of the locality.
Very good, very good.
I second that.
It's been seconded by Wayne. All in favor. April?
Yes.
Wayne?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes,
And I am a yes as well. So it meets the third prong of the variance test, also unanimously, 5-0. Which brings us to the fourth prong of the variance test, which is, excuse me, a hardship is not the result of action taken by the applicant or a prior owner. So I'll stop by noting that we don't just look at the applicant here. We also look at the applicant's predecessor and title that pulled the permits, the initial permits, particularly the planning board permit. Let's see, what are your thoughts? Mr. McDonald, what is your initial thought on this?
so my thought on this one is that that the hardship, in this case, was created by JJWZ or the prior owner. And I say that because, when I look at the parcel, they built it right on the setbacks. So they had to know they were building it on the setbacks. They knew that they were gonna need, some way to access that front door. So it was, I think, clearly known up front. I think even the survey that was done in 2016 outlines the platform on the survey, which was before the building permit. So, I think there was the ability to make a smaller building to meet the setback requirements possibly, and or move it closer to the waterfront side. So I think it was the result of the action taken by JJWZ or the prior owner.
Can I
And I think if it had been brought to us before it had been constructed, that I don't think we would have provided a variance.
when you made reference,
Definitely looked for other ways to meet the requirements before providing a variance.
when you made reference to the survey that was 2016,
Yeah, maybe I'm not looking at that properly, but
2017,
well, I got a 2017 survey,
2017.
2017.
No, it's, if you look on the applicant's,
His first building permit,
am I reading that wrong when it says?
no, you're not reading it wrong, Kevin. If you, the application and in the, in Part B, boundary, upper left-hand corner, boundary survey, 48, Kennebunkport, July 8th, 2016
Yeah, that's the way I read it.
is the
And
Lower Village survey, first.
and the permit was actually issued a month or two later, I believe.
Yeah, where is, can you direct me to that again, Wayne? I want to.
Okay.
we did not receive survey in 2016. We received 17 and 2020.
No, I'm
No.
saying-
Look in the request for the application. No, I know what you're pointing at, Karen, but if, go to Part B where the survey is actually shown.
Yeah,
Yep,
Upper left-hand corner, plan reference,
yep.
and then read that.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, but have we seen that plan from 2016? We did not see it.
that's not this.
It's in the
plan.
application.
No, that's a plan reference, so that
It's a
means
reference.
that the surveyor looked at that prior plan prior to,
Okay,
Creating,
So I am looking at that wrong then.
okay.
I think that the earliest date that I have seen on a survey was 2017. I'm not
Okay.
saying there isn't a 16, but I
Okay.
haven't seen
Yeah.
this.
So Sandra's reference to the 2017 is the one to go by.
I
think that's
retract
early
that part.
one We've
Yep.
seen the materials.
delete, back it up. Okay.
Back that up. I wasn't sure I was looking.
That was just
Yep.
part of the discussion anyway, not a motion.
Oh, was that an essential part of your comment, Kevin?
No, that was just an additive part of it. But I think that, again, had it come to us before it was built, I think we would have looked for other remedies, either making a smaller building, moving it on the lot before granting a variance. And I think, it clearly was known that a future request would be required.
Wayne?
Let me phrase it. Let me get hold on just a second. The hardship for me is certainly is both in the original O'Reilly where it is a full building taking, as Kevin said, going up to the setbacks. And also, as I mentioned earlier, as an informed contractor who would know setbacks and how to do that, the feeling that I have now is it is that due to the violations with the beams extended, which it's an interesting subject of they were long, so we left them. If we're asking for an exception to something that we did wrong. If we used a sidewall brackets in order to hold staging and we left them up afterwards, and then we put something on them as an overhang because they were there, that's you're outside what your permit says. It's fairly clear and it's hard to overlook that. That for me is the most open and obvious of all of this.
April?
I definitely feel the hardship was created either by the applicant or the previous owner. Mr. O'Reilly went to planning board and had all these plans, and he was probably perfectly fine with the way it was. But he never built the building. And then when Mr. Zook came along and bought the property and the permits and the planning board approval, I mean, Mr. Zook is a smart man. He clearly understands building and the building process. He's been a builder and a roofer for his entire life. When he saw these plans, it should have been very clear to him that he was right on the setbacks and there was no way to get out that door and build anything out there. He was up in the air and something had to be done. However, rather than going back to planning board, he took the building permit the way it was and built it, and now is coming to us after the fact. So I think that, I mean, he's the one who built the building. He's the one who created the hardship because he built it that way. He certainly could have gone back to planning board and made the building smaller so he could have had a landing platform, but for some reason he didn't do that. So I feel that he does not meet this section of the ordinance.
Darren?
I feel as though the hardship does fall on the applicant and a previous owner of the property.
Well, are you saying that it's self-created?
Yes.
Okay. I agree with all of you. I think that, as Warner said, there was no prohibition for him going back to the planning board to get it adjusted if he knew from the elevation of the building, which he did know before he constructed it, because it sounded like that the original elevation that was in the planning board materials was several feet above the ground. I can't remember what the specifics were, and was going to require something, even just based on that. But then it got adjusted again. We're told when he went in to build, because he had to make adjustments. Sandra told us that adjustments needed to be made to accommodate the new FEMA regulations. Then he knew that the elevation was going to be significant. So it was at that time, and he's a seasoned builder, that if he anticipated needing something, it's really dependent upon, it's contingent upon him to get a survey to figure out where the setbacks are. You can't ignore setbacks and then find out you got a problem with setbacks and then say it's not my fault. It is your fault if you don't do your groundwork there, I think, because you'd expect that of any builder or the property owner. And here it's not one and the same, because we respect the legal fiction of a limited liability company, but the principle is the same. And that the door to the planning board wasn't closed. And then if we took it back one step further, and when Bob O'Reilly got the approvals, He didn't seek anything. He didn't look for anything beyond just the structure. So I find it for all those reasons to be a self-created hardship as well. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion.
I'll make a motion
Okay, great.
that after the discussion that we just had, I believe that the applicant did not meet section 9B 2D of the ordinance, that the hardship is not the result of action taken by the applicant or a prior owner.
Second?
Second.
Second by Wayne. All in favor, one at a time. April 1st?
Yes?
Wayne,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yeah,
and yes, by myself as well. So that's the end of that. So all, in summary then, the application for the variance is denied for failure to meet prongs 1, sorry,
A.
A.
for 9 to B to A, B, and D. The board did find that the applicant met 9 to B to C. So that's our final vote. And with that, I would like everybody to stay for a moment to have a brief discussion of other matters unrelating to this. But I'll entertain, well, actually, no, that's the end of this subject matter. I can't close the meeting first and then have a minor discussion. But we've
You
concluded
got
on,
minutes. You have the minutes too to vote on.
right. So the one thing that we didn't vote on the minutes. And I mentioned this last time, Wayne, you weren't here, but
Yes.
we're in arrears on having an election for the offices of the board. So what I would like to do is schedule a brief meeting. I'll work it out and circulate dates and stuff in the next month or two. Maybe we'll get past the holidays first. Simply for the purpose, if we have no pending applications at that time, to have an election of officers. There are 3, the chair, the vice chair, which is me and Wayne, and our brilliant secretary, which is Karen Schlegel.
Yeah.
Um,
The lovely and brilliant. Yeah.
Lovely and brilliant Karen Schlegel. So anybody who, is everybody good with that, that we do that? I don't want to do it now, and we can set up a meeting for that.
I mean, we could do it now. It'll only take a minute. No?
Let's set up a time.
Okay.
We can do it. It will only take, get rid of it. So anybody who wants to be one of those officers, feel free to nominate yourself or arm twist somebody else to nominate you. Okay, and then at that meeting, we'll also address the minutes. Why don't we take care of them at that time? Just do a twofer. But it won't be, we won't let it interrupt the holidays at all. So with that, I will entertain a motion to close the meeting.
Motion to
April.
adjourn?
Yeah. to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, April,
Aye.
Wayne,
Yes.
Karen,
Aye.
Kevin,
yes.
and myself, yes, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.